The first thing I noticed about Riverstone Mansion was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels expensive. My worn shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as Mrs. Calder, the housekeeper, led me inside. The sound echoed through the enormous hall, as if the house itself was reminding me that I didn't belong here. I tightened my grip on the strap of my bag. Inside it was a small drawing my 6-year-old son Felix had made that morning. A crooked stick figure holding hands with another. "That's you and me, Mama," he'd said proudly. I had smiled then. Now, standing inside a palace, I suddenly felt like that drawing was the only real thing in my life. "Stay close," Mrs. Calder said sharply. "Mrs. Riverstone dislikes confusion." I nodded quickly. This job mattered too much to mess up. 6 months of unpaid rent. 6 months of pretending dinner was a fun picnic, when all we had was bread. This job meant Felix could finally have warm boots this winter. We stepped into the main living room. And that was when the world tilted. A massive portrait hung above the fireplace. A man stared down from the canvas. Dark hair, gray eyes, a faint scar above the eyebrow. My lungs stopped working. No, it couldn't be. But my heart already knew. I whispered the name before I could stop myself. John. My fingers began to shake. 7 years ago, he had walked out of my life without a word. 7 years ago, he had left behind more than memories. He had left behind Felix. "Are you unwell?" a cold voice asked behind me. I turned. A tall woman stood at the staircase, silver hair twisted into a perfect knot. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. Astrid Riverstone, the owner of this empire. Her eyes followed mine to the portrait, then back to my face. "Why," she asked slowly, "are you staring at my son like that?" My heartbeat thundered, because the man in that portrait was the father of my child. I swallowed. If I stayed silent, my life might remain safe. But if I spoke, everything could explode. I heard Felix's voice in my memory. "Mama, do I have a dad somewhere?" My chest tightened. I lifted my eyes to Astrid Riverstone and said the one sentence that could destroy my future. "Madam, why does the father of my son hang on your wall?" The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. And something inside me whispered a terrifying thought. This was only the beginning. Astrid Riverstone didn't shout. Somehow that made everything worse. She stood perfectly still beside the staircase, her pale gray eyes fixed on me as if she were deciding whether I was a nuisance or a threat. "Repeat what you just said," she ordered quietly. The room felt colder. I swallowed, forcing my voice not to break. I said, "The man in that portrait is the father of my son." For a moment nothing moved. Then Astrid descended the staircase slowly, each step measured, controlled. Predatory. When she stopped in front of me, she looked me over from head to toe. The worn shoes, the cheap coat, the trembling hands. "A maid arrives on her first day," she said calmly, "and claims my son fathered her child." Her voice sharpened. How original. My chest tightened. I'm not lying. Everyone says that. Her words cut deeper than I expected. "People have tried to trap this family before," she continued coldly. "They usually want money." "I don't want your money." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence slammed into the room. Astrid's eyebrows lifted slightly. Then I said the one thing I had kept buried for 7 years. "I want the truth." My throat burned. I forced myself to speak. "He used to come into my snack bar every morning at 7:30, I said. "Black coffee, no sugar." Astrid's expression flickered. "My son drinks it that way. He said sugar ruins the taste." Her fingers tightened slightly. I kept going, because stopping now would destroy me. "He always sat by the window. Said he liked watching people rush past like their lives depended on trains." Astrid's gaze sharpened. "He hates being late," she murmured. A dangerous silence followed. Then I whispered something that made my eyes sting. "The last night I saw him, it was raining. He kissed my forehead and promised he'd come back the next day." My voice cracked. "He never did." Astrid folded her arms, and conveniently she said, "A child appeared?" I nodded slowly. 6 weeks later. The words trembled out of me. I raised Felix alone. For a moment Astrid looked almost thoughtful. Then she turned abruptly and opened a cabinet. Inside was a thick leather photo album. She dropped it onto the table between us. "Prove it," she said. My hands shook as I opened the first page. There he was, John, laughing on a beach. My heart twisted painfully. "He tilts his head back when he laughs," I whispered. Astrid froze. "My son does that." I turned another page, "and he runs his hand through his hair when he's nervous." Astrid's voice became quieter. "He still does." Then I reached into my pocket and placed something small on the table. A faded cafe coaster. My name written on it in blue ink. "John kept this," I said softly. Astrid stared at it. Her hand trembled, and for the first time the iron certainty in her eyes cracked. She whispered slowly, "How long did you say you've had that?" The next morning I stood in front of the iron gates of Riverstone Mansion with Felix's small hand wrapped tightly around mine. My palm was damp. Not from the cold, from fear. Felix looked up at the towering mansion with wide, curious eyes. "Mama, is this a castle?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." Inside, my heart was beating so loudly I thought the guards might hear it. Astrid Riverstone had only said 5 words on the phone the night before. "Bring the boy tomorrow morning." Nothing more. No warmth, no promise, just judgment waiting behind those doors. Felix squeezed my fingers. "Are we in trouble?" The question nearly broke me. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "We're just meeting someone important." The doors opened. Astrid stood in the entrance hall like a statue carved from marble. Her eyes didn't look at me. They locked onto Felix, and something in her expression shifted. Felix hid halfway behind my leg. "She's scary," he whispered loudly. For a moment, silence filled the enormous hall. Then, to my surprise, Astrid slowly bent down to his level. "What is your name, young man?" she asked. Felix studied her carefully. "Felix." Astrid's gaze softened a fraction. "Would you like a cookie, Felix?" Felix immediately stepped out from behind me. "Yes." The tension in the room cracked for a second. As he bit into the cookie, crumbs fell onto the polished floor. Felix laughed. And in that exact moment, a small dimple appeared in his cheek. Astrid froze. Her hand slowly lifted to her mouth. Jonathan had that same dimple. The exact one. I saw the realization hit her like lightning. Felix wiped his mouth and looked up at her curiously. "Why are you staring at me?" Astrid didn't answer immediately. Her eyes looked suddenly distant, like someone walking through old memories. Finally she stood up. Her voice was quieter now, almost shaken. "I need to make a call." She walked toward the study without looking back. I heard the door close. Then her voice through the wall. Cold. Direct. "Jonathan." A pause. "Yes." Immediately. Another pause. And then the sentence that made my knees tremble. "You need to come home." Silence. Then her final words fell like thunder. "You have a son." I heard his voice before I saw him. 7 years had passed, yet my heart recognized it instantly. A deep voice echoed through the entrance hall. "Mother, what's so urgent?" My fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. I hadn't prepared for this moment. No one can truly prepare to meet the man who once vanished from their life like a ghost. Felix sat on the carpet nearby, drawing a crooked house with crayons Astrid had given him. He had no idea. Footsteps approached. Then Jonathan Riverstone stepped into the room. Time stopped. He looked older than the man I remembered. His shoulders were broader, his face sharper, his eyes carrying the kind of shadows life carves into people who've seen too much. But it was still him, John. The man who once kissed my forehead in the rain and promised, "I'll see you tomorrow." His gaze swept the room. Then it landed on me, and the color drained from his face. "Laura?" My name left his mouth like something fragile. Astrid didn't waste time. "You have a son," she said calmly. The silence that followed felt like the air had been punched out of the room. Jonathan blinked. "What?" Astrid nodded toward Felix. "My grandson." Jonathan's eyes slowly moved to the little boy sitting on the floor. Felix looked up curiously. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Something strange passed between them, something quiet but undeniable. Felix tilted his head slightly, exactly the way Jonathan did when he was confused. Jonathan staggered backward a step. This isn't possible." My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. You left before I knew I was pregnant. His eyes snapped back to me. Laura, I didn't leave because I wanted to. Astrid folded her arms. Explain. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, a familiar nervous habit that made my chest tighten. My father found out about us, he said hoarsely. Victor Riverstone doesn't tolerate weakness. My blood went cold. He told me if I didn't disappear, Jonathan continued, you would. The room went silent again. Felix looked between us, confused. Mommy, who is that man? My heart shattered. Jonathan's voice broke as he whispered the question that had waited 7 years. Can I meet him? Felix didn't run into Jonathan's arms. Children are wiser than adults sometimes. They don't trust words. They watch actions. For the first few days, Felix stayed close to me, studying the stranger who came every afternoon. Jonathan never forced himself into the boy's space. He simply sat beside him on the floor and began drawing. What's that? Felix asked one day, pointing at the sketch. A house, Jonathan said. Felix squinted. Why so many windows? Jonathan smiled faintly. Because sunlight makes people happier. Felix thought about it. Then he grabbed another crayon and added a crooked door. For Mama, he said proudly. Something cracked in Jonathan's expression. But peace didn't last long. One evening, Astrid burst into the room, pale and furious. They know, she said. Jonathan's face hardened instantly. Who? Moretti's people. They've been watching Laura and the boy. My stomach dropped. The rival mafia family. Felix. They wanted Felix. Jonathan stood very still. Then he said the words that shocked even his mother. I'm ending it. Astrid's eyes widened. Ending what? My empire. The room fell silent. For years I protected power, Jonathan said quietly. But I never protected the people I loved. The next months were a storm. Contracts dissolved, businesses sold, allies turned away. Jonathan dismantled the empire his father built. Piece by piece. Until there was nothing left worth threatening. 2 years later he handed Felix a small brass key. To our house, he said. Felix burst through the door first. Mama. Daddy built us a castle. Sunlight filled every room. And in the middle of the living room, Jonathan held us both tightly. I can't get those 7 years back, he whispered. Felix looked up at him and said the word that healed everything. Daddy. Jonathan closed his eyes, holding us like we were the only thing left in the world. And for the first time since the day he disappeared, our family finally felt whole.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.